Not much.
This is the story of two companies of Australian soldiers, separated by over 60 years. Their actions inextricably bound by a debt of honor. For almost 4 years, Australian soldiers had been part of a peacekeeping force in East Timor. This 8-man section from 3-2 Charlie had been on active patrol for 5 months. They've had no alcohol, no time off, and little contact with families back home.
Tango 24-15, back to batters.
For Ben, Kevin Wags, it's their third 6-month tour of duty. The first was with Interfet in 1999. 24 years after Indonesia invaded East Timor, the population was finally allowed an election to decide its own future. Despite an overwhelming vote for independence, Indonesian-backed militia attacked the population, and the country descended into chaos. After weeks of mayhem, the United Nations, in conjunction with Australia, formed Interfet, a force that would restore peace and security in East Timor.
We are anticipating that there may be some disquiet at our arrival.
He warned that the troops will shoot to defend themselves, saying his soldiers are not as defenceless as the East Timorese who voted for independence.
I shit myself when I first stepped off the boat. Walking through Dili, like, there was just that, sense of not knowing. No one knew what we were in for or what was going to happen.
The first thing that hit me when we stepped off was the smell. I'll just never forget that smell. And then secondly, looking on the ground and seeing someone's wedding photos, half burnt and scattered all over the ground.
Those sort of situations where I think you grow. You just learn a lot about yourself anyway.
While it may have seemed that Australia was liberating this vulnerable country, in fact, the Australian Army owed a huge debt to the Timorese people. A 60-year-old debt, incurred in the Second World War. What happened to the Australian soldiers on the island of Timor in the Second World War is one of the great untold stories of military history. It's a story of a tiny group of men who faced insurmountable odds, and who, with the unmatched courage of the native population, held back over 20,000 Japanese troops from Australia's doorstep.
In 1999, when we were watching the unfolding of events affecting East Timor, I was looking for insights into the people, into the terrain, into the military operations, and there was this immediate leapfrog link between the army of 1999 and those magnificent men of 1942.
These magnificent men of 1942 were the Second Independence, a new guerrilla-trained force.
Some of the finest young Australians from all over the army were put through quite rigorous training to make them fitter, faster, more enduring, and more independent of mind. They were the cream of the crop.
100 Japanese planes and a number of midget submarines took part in the attack. In an hour and 5 minutes, the battleship Arizona was completely destroyed and 4 others severely damaged.
The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in late 1941. Australia sent troops north, attempting to stem the onslaught. The Second Independence was sent to East Timor.
The Australians landed about 3 miles out towards the Comoro River, west of Dili, and not all that far from the airfield.
In early 1942, the Japanese attacked Allied troops faster and more violently than anyone expected. Almost all of the Dutch East Indies had fallen by the time the Japanese launched a full-scale invasion of Timor.
In the case of Timor, it also gave the Japanese a base from which to threaten Australia and to neutralise actions from Australia. So Timor for them was quite strategic.
The sea platoon men, they heard the gunfire when the Japanese warships opened up on Dili. Well, everyone goes into action. No one knew what had happened in Dili.
With only a few hundred men scattered across Dili, facing thousands of Japanese troops, the independents attempted to protect the aerodrome in a fierce gunfight. Facing overwhelming odds, the independents retreated into the inhospitable mountains of East Timor.
With a native population of 700,000, Timor is today ostensibly Japanese. But somewhere on that island is a gallant band of Australians supported by a few Dutch.
In Australia, we were written off. My mother received a telegram saying that I was missing in action. That's all they got, that I was missing in action.
The Timorese were headhunters and lived in small communities in mountainous country. They didn't understand World War II. It was meaningless.
Every man that was on Timor with the second owes their life to the Timorese. Why in the name of God should a people help us when they could see quite plainly that the Japanese had everything? They had water transport, they had warships, they had aeroplanes, and all the Australians had was the backside out of their pants.
By February 1942, the commandos of the Second Independence were hiding in the Timorese mountains, surrounded by thousands of Japanese. 60 years later, in exactly the same inhospitable mountains, the soldiers of 3-2 Charlie are also facing significant danger. Corporal Ben Bounden leads his 8-man section on a covert Green Hat patrol to flush out the Indonesian militia that may still be operating on the border.
They're expected, if we encounter them, to be 3 to 5 man groups with an assorted of weapons ranging from M16s, G3s, SKSs, AK-47s and or SS1s. And they are most likely to attack soft targets, such as the towns of Rayuli or Manahat.
3-2 Charlie, in lock,
The section conceals themselves as Ben takes a few men with him to investigate the surrounding area.
3-0, this is 3-2 Charlie.
Nick has to radio their position to headquarters.
I couldn't honestly tell you whether we're the best infantry in the world. I think we're pretty good. I haven't seen a lot of the other infantries at work. I mean, I've worked with the Yanks and they've got all the gear, but some of their training's not the best. Always daydreaming, always thinking about something. Making sure the guys are doing the right thing. My wife, my son, my new bike.
3-0, this is 3-2 Charlie. Short message, prepare to copy over.
Nick still can't get through to headquarters. There appears to be a major malfunction with the radios. 3-2 Charlie are cut off.
3-0.
The covert operation is in danger.
Charlie, radio check, over.
3-0, this is 3-2 Charlie, radio check over.
Back in 1942, the Second Independence faced the same problem, but with far graver consequences.
From the time the Japanese landed in Timor, we had no radio contact with anyone. No one at all. The wirelesses we had couldn't contact Australia.
The second's escape into the mountains brought little relief. The independents were racked with malaria and had little food.
I reckon we were down to our last couple of cases of bully beef. From the first day that the Japanese landed in East Timor, all you could find out in the mountains was hungry Australians looking for food.
Of all the Allied forces in Southeast Asia, they were the only ones that had not been captured and had not surrendered. They were surrounded by thousands of Japanese troops. Things were very bad.
They were thought to be lost. They might have been thought to have fragments and survivors trying to hide in the jungle, but I think there would have been no perception that they were operating as a coherent, aggressive military unit, giving the Japanese quite some hurry up.
Even in the modern world, sophisticated technology can fail the best equipped soldiers. Ben relocates his section in order to rig their radios in a site with less interference. They are now out in the open, in the dangerous border region.
All right, Waggy. Send someone out. I never actually considered myself to be a leader. I always remember when I was younger, around my footy club, my nickname was Marcel. Because I wouldn't say a word, I'd just might be there. People would like turn around, Jesus, and I'd be there. I wasn't exactly outspoken when I was younger.
Ben still can't get through to headquarters. He's managed to reach a section of soldiers nearby. They can deliver working radios, but only the next day.
Unhook it, bring the radio in until uniform elements get here.
Until then, 3-2 Charlie can do nothing other than establish a perimeter and wait.
Who's due up for picket next?
Me.
Yeah, can you go out there, mate? I've got to sort out some things with orders.
In your 6 months, you'll spend a month in one of those things. Each tour, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And so that's equated nearly to 3 months of my life in a guard box. You're there to watch and basically provide security and information for the guys that are back there resting. And after 6 months, it's one of the hated places in the world. I think when I arrived, I was a lot more patient than I was the first time at least. Living with guys for 6 months, some guys are a lot like you know, angry women. They can be very moody, and not that all women are moody, but you know what I mean. Please say yes, yeah. And 6 months away, and different little stresses that can be put on people. Everyone reacts a little bit different.
The company of 3-2 Charlie have no radios, and their covert operation has been blown. While they wait for equipment in an area where Indonesian militia have been operating, some young men and local kids are seen approaching the perimeter.
Speak English?
Yeah,
yes.
Speaking about a little.
Little?
Yeah, little.
That's nice. Voor kalian nek hanya tetum ladu diak.
Oh, ladung diak.
Yeah, it's important to have a bit of a joke and a laugh with the kids, and that you portray to them that you're not over here as a big sort of security guard, bouncer type thing that you'd find on a nightclub back in Australia. You know, you're here to, we're here to help them. You know, it's important that we come across as not the bad guys. You know, for sure.
Naran Casey.
Casey.
And Naran Kevin.
Kevin. Mr. Kevin.
The Timorese were very loyal people. They would put their life at risk once they believed in you.
60 years ago, the roles between Australian soldiers and the East Timorese were exactly reversed. The men of the independents depended on the local population for their survival. and a unique bond was forged.
Guerrillas can only survive if they have the support of the local community.
Addition to the larder, friendly natives bring in a young croc, all alive-o, so that he'll keep, but so trussed up that he might as well be dead anyway.
The practice was that each soldier would have a young East Timorese man called a criado as a sort of an offsider. And that person would guide the commando, help the commando carry his overwhelmingly heavy kit, take them to shelter, find food for them, sometimes pick them up when they were wounded and spirit them away, and sometimes cover their withdrawal, and sometimes give their lives. It was a wonderful example of simple heroism and the bond between people of vastly different cultures.
Dickie walked up to me on a mountainside and said, "Me, Piggy," Piggy meaning I walk with you and become your criado. I was delighted. He at once took my pack, and he was a smiling, happy boy. And every evening, as we stopped to have a camp, the criados would get together and share their experiences.
.32 Charlie set up camp for the night and post guards. Ben saves the worst shift for himself and Casey.
Kev had a dream the other night that I got eaten by a shark, and he was asking the shark to give me back, and the shark was talking to him saying, "No, you can't have him."
I had a pretty bad dream the other night, actually. I was playing for Carlton.
Why Carlton? You played for Richmond.
That's why it was a bad dream.
Not fair enough.
Right, yeah. That's actually fair.
No, down here, too easy.
By March 1942, the Allied forces of the Dutch East Indies had surrendered to the Japanese. The Japanese in Timor sent demands to the independents hiding in the mountains that they too must surrender. If not, they would lose all POW rights and be executed when captured. Still out of contact with Australia, but with the criados at their side, the independents refused and began to fight back.
They fight the Japs in a hit-and-run warfare, severely rattling the much more numerous enemy. They ambush him, shoot him up with Brens, Tommy guns and rifles, their only weapons.
The independents' ambushes against the Japanese were the stuff of legends. With a fighting force of less than 300, they killed almost 1,500 Japanese. They lost only 14 lives.
Strangely enough, most of the men were hungry, morale was sky high, and they didn't give a bugger about the war because they were still alive.
Hit and run, kill all you can and retire. The true guerrilla.
In various raids on the Japanese, the soldiers were able to steal enough parts to build a radio.
They went at night even into Japanese-held Dili, shot up the nips, and took a generator from a car. They melted solder out of old gear and caught it in bamboo for reuse. And after many heartbreaking failures, they got a signal through to Darwin.
Finally, the new radios arrived for 32 Charlie. Now they can resume their covert patrol.
32 Charlie, all loud and clear. Out. Good to go.
What we're doing is securing LZ, Abalone Alpha. Right, we go in, we'll provide security. Patrol from 3-1 will come in, they'll land, and we'll swap them.
I know a little bit about the Australian soldiers that served over here in the Second World War. Actually, my grandfather was a couple of islands across at New Guinea. That's another great thing, you know, that we've both now served in the same part of the country. And a lot of the older folk here actually remember Australian soldiers from Second World War. So.
Increasing as the Japanese found that they could not subjugate all of Timor without fighting these commandos, they poured more and more troops in. In the end, thousands and thousands of troops.
They were using artillery, mortars, dogs, the Air Force, but we were still surviving. They still hadn't closed the net on us. The Japanese realised that the only reason the Australians were able to keep going was because of the support they were getting from the Timorese and the Portuguese. And as they advanced in the August push, they burnt the villages, they destroyed the crops, and they killed off whatever livestock they could get. But the Criados never left us. They stayed with us right to the finish.
The importance of the Timorese to the survival and the success achieved by the independent companies was absolutely vital. They showed them where to go and how to hide and how to appear suddenly against the Japanese supply lines. In all of this, without the cooperation and the courage of the Timorese people, the independent companies would have lasted 5 minutes.
There was great camaraderie, tremendous goodwill, and so wherever, almost wherever we went, we'd get friendship.
The men of 3-2 Charlie arrive back from their covert patrol, hot, filthy and tired.
Another day, another dollar.
There's a nasty surprise waiting.
What's that? You got no water?
Are those taps on?
Yeah, these taps on. Are you getting water there, Bill? No. Do you have shampoo? Yes. Can I borrow some, please? Let's see. Oh, here we go. How was it? So some demons controlling your water.
Turn yours off, Nick, Casey.
Sorry?
Turn all your water off.
What?
I want some.
Well, the communal living, it's different. It's not like you can go down the road and just get away for a while because you are in a compound.
Fucking hell.
And you shower, and everyone washes and eats and everything together, you know. It can be good and it can be bad. I mean, everyone has different habits. Some filthy and some are funny, but yeah, it's just different.
No water? Yeah. You're kidding. There's water now.
Yeah, hot water, mate. Sorry about that.
Well, what do you think, Wags? That's hairy, but it's character.
I don't have a six-pack. I like to think I've got a keg.
You don't intentionally sort of try and support one another, I don't think. You know, that's a bit gay, but... No, you do, though.
That's not, tell me that's not this year's financial year end in June.
Did I get ripped off?
Who did you get to do that?
I sent it in by myself.
Did you?
Yeah, why?
Congratulations, seeing the accountant next time you got $33.
Oh, did I?
Yeah, if the guys now, they can come up and talk to either myself or Ben, and if they've got problems, then we can talk about it or try and help them out, sort things out, and you do sort of tend to lean on one another's shoulder every now and then, but yeah, a couple of group hugs and that, yeah, a bit of groping.
You owe them $33.
I got ripped off.
You owe them $33.
Oh.
She's still cool with it.
Right, my missus is going to say that I eat like a pig.
Has a rubbish run been done today?
No.
4:30. They've been doing it in the afternoon now, they should.
Oh, fuck. Do you want to give us a hand with this, mate?
The army is nothing at all like what you see on movies, TV. A lot of people do join the army expecting it to be Predator, Commando and everything all rolled into one.
I mean, you watch the movies and you only get to see the best bits. And there are a lot of bits that you probably don't want to do all the time.
Going to the tip.
Until you're faced with someone trying to fire back at you. It's not that fun. You don't want to be there as crazy as everyone thinks they are. No one wants to go to war and get shot at and be dirty and filthy all the time.
In September 1942, a second commando unit was sent to East Timor to reinforce the independence. For 3.5 months, nearly 700 Australian soldiers continued to fight an astonishingly effective guerrilla campaign.
Our 2 commando units had held up 20,000 Japanese. So that was the importance of our effort.
But the war in the Pacific was intensifying.
Eventually the independent companies had to leave. A shrewd decision was made to bring them back to Australia. These were some of our very best soldiers, needed later in the war, and we couldn't allow them to sacrifice themselves.
The independents were given almost no notice of their intended evacuation of East Timor. For some, the first they knew of it were the orders to head down from the mountains to a treacherous stretch of coast. There, the ships were waiting.
We were on the beach that night, and all the criados knew we were going to Australia. They were crying. The Australians were equally so. We had those people who lived with us, fended for us, cared for us, protected us, and we were leaving them. And we were perfectly well aware that we were going back to Australia with no more worries. The people we had gone in to ostensibly defend and save were going to be left at the mercy of the Japanese. And that's what happened to them.
It's one of the most distressing experiences in life, knowing that Dickie had put his life at risk for me, to say, Dickie, you have to stay here. One felt so disloyal that these youngsters had helped us to survive. And now we're saying, you go back into a hostile land. And I saw myself as his killer. So it's one of the heartaches and senses of shame I have carried for many years.
That would have been the most terrible departure, and that, I think, probably did affect the men of the independent companies for the rest of their lives.
Okay. Oi! No, bring it back. Bring it back. See?
Family and friends ask me what it's like over here, like how the people live, and it's hard to describe. When I sort of first got over here, I couldn't believe there was people living like this still. There's people scrounging through your rubbish, trying to find a meal. You know, it's a real eye-opener, especially for a young bloke like myself, you know, 20, 23. Most 23-year-olds back in Australia, you know, wouldn't dream of seeing something like this. The longer you're over here, obviously, that you get used to it, but it's not until you get back to Australia that you actually know how it's affected you.
Come back.
We learn to appreciate where we come from by looking at these guys. We really don't know how fortunate we are yet. That's good.
The East Timorese suffered greatly. I mean, you just imagine something like 40,000 of them either were killed or died of starvation because of Japanese action during their occupation. Out of a population of then 650,000. If you compare it with Australia, we lost 28,000 during the Second World War out of a population of 7 million. So you can just compare the difference in the suffering that we placed onto them.
The men who fought in East Timor in the Second World War were haunted by their experiences. Many diggers felt they'd abandoned the very people who'd ensured their survival.
All of us in the second believed they had an obligation. They still felt what they owed the Timorese people. In fact, so much so that in 1990 we set up a special fund, the East Timor Fund, and we have sent bundles and bundles of aid into East Timor. We've raised at least $50,000 from amongst ourselves, and we're a diminishing community.
3-2 Charlie carry out another of their peacekeeping tasks. This time as part of a United Nations Blue Hat Patrol.
The purpose of a Blue Hat Patrol was to get out there and provide information and get information from the locals, to let them see us and for us to get out there and get amongst them, and just so we can still get a feel for the community, so we can report back and they can build the bigger picture that we never get to see. We'd have a certain task, and that might be to hand out these pamphlets or to gather this information, find this person. Just depends on the patrol.
Hey!
Because some guys put on this big, tough army front, and they think that's what they want to see, whereas I think they just want a bit of compassion and a bit of respect. I think you've got to give them a respect because it's their country and you're in their village. Everyone likes to be happy and safe, and they're very resilient, and a lot of guys respect that more than anything else, because a lot of them have seen more action than anyone here in the army ever will.
Sira Haredia, Timor Haretira Diaclo, we Loronto, Australia, Tamagora. Hori Uluk Nian, Kalaranian, To, Dalatulune, Hanesanti, La Hanesanti, La Halmal Pitu Timor.
Serdiak tambah hari Amidia, Setumai, Simua Media, hari Amidia, la halo asa la Hirus, la iha ida be halo Hanesa Amiasa,
lah, Sirmus Haridia.
Sir Haridia.
When we left, the Australian Air Force dropped leaflets saying, "We will remember you." And a few months after our departure, the Japanese slaughtered 40,000 Timorese for having helped Australia.
After the end of World War II, the Portuguese resumed colonial rule in East Timor. In the mid-1970s, Portugal allowed the East Timorese to form political parties. Fighting between two parties, Fretlan and UDT, broke out in 1975, and the Portuguese withdrew from the country. Fretlan declared Timorese independence in November 1975. 2 weeks later, there was a full-scale invasion of East Timor by Indonesia.
In 1975, Australia supported Indonesia to take control of East Timor. You can imagine my emotion. Horror, disgust, shame, great shame. I was an Australian and my country was betraying the Timorese.
I mean, the East Timorese are very firmly convinced that the Australians would help them if there was an Indonesian invasion, because they'd provided such support and risked so much and suffered so much because the Australians had gone in there in the Second World War.
East Timor endured Indonesian military rule for the next 25 years. Hundreds of thousands of people were displaced, and an estimated 250,000 of the population killed.
I said to one of our blokes, I was that wild one night, there were 12, but I said if I was a Timorese, I'd spit in an Australian's eye.
I don't think that Australia really paid their debt to the courage of those people. They didn't even try to analyse it. It's easy to send people off to war, but you to try to get governments to give justice and remunerations to former servicemen. So why would they think greatly about the East Timorese? I mean, governments are pretty callous.
The veterans established their own groups and took action and went to Canberra and saw Andrew Peacock and tried in every way, I think, to bring Australia into some position of being able to help politically take a stronger line on East Timor.
Some of the veterans remained passionate advocates for Timorese independence for decades. For them, watching the Australian Army enter the country in 1999 was partial payment of a debt of honour.
I was proud of them to see that the Australians were being the major international party to come in. Gave me pride.
For 4 years, these men have been part of the peacekeeping mission to restore stability and security to East Timor.
It's interesting when guys go back on their leave, after sort of being over here for a little while, your attitude change towards Australia. I don't think people realise how it does affect us. When you come over here and you see these people, how happy they are. Yet we go back to Australia and there's people worried about not finding a car park at the local shopping centre. You know, it's just something so small, and it just really does. It sort of gets on your nerves a bit.
One of the most endearing characteristics of Australian servicemen and women is that they will look to understand and empathise with the people amongst whom they're operating. And certainly on all peace operations, we urge our young men and women to get out amongst the community, to understand them and to behave in an affectionate and sensitive way towards them. We urge that, but we don't need to. It's in the nature of Australians. And I think there was this special quotient in that relationship in East Timor, because all of our young people understood that these people had given so much, supporting their actual or spiritual fathers and grandfathers back then in 1942.
This ball, is it?
Paddy has returned to East Timor 6 times since 1942. This time, he is visiting the last surviving criado, Rufino.
I don't know what the hell Timor's done to me. Every now I get a yen to go back and see how they're going. Actually, when I go back, it's like 1942. I'm practically on the bum. They're doing the supplying. I mean, I give money for whatever I get. But if I didn't have a penny, those people that I see, they'd still give me a cup of coffee, they'd still give me some rice to eat, they'd still do that if I was dead broke. But the strange thing is, their children knows the story. Their children knows the story, yet our children don't know the story. Yeah, and Tuan Morgan, and that's the name. Yeah.
Timor was a unique experience. Most of us did not believe that we'd see Australia again. The fact that we did, and we had such loyalty and fun.
Yes.
Life was raw, but so loyal.
I suppose I was most clearly reminded of the bond when we commemorated Remembrance Day on the 11th of November 99 up on the heights overlooking Dili. A multinational representative group gathered, including a dear old man, a criado. I found this man standing in the audience and asked him would he stand with me, symbolically, and he said, but I have no wreath. I said, well, share my wreath. And together we went up and laid the wreath at the memorial to the independent companies on those heights overlooking Dili. And then as he and I moved back, we got to a pothole in the road, quite a big pothole. And I stopped so that this dear old man would not stumble into the hole. He looked and he nodded to me, leapt over the hole and then offered me his hand. Here was an 85-year-old criado giving this Australian a hand in his country, just as he had done nearly 60 years before.
Bendo